Abraham to see its conclusion. So just to remind you a little bit about some of the bigger picture here, in chapter 16, which is a bit of a pivot point in Abram's life, that's when he had Ishmael with Hagar. On either side of that, there was God reaffirming his covenant with Abram, first in chapter 15 and then in chapter 17, through some sign that he gives him. Then in chapter 14, we saw destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Only Lot, Lot was rescued as a result of Abraham's intervention. And so now, once again, now on the other side of Abraham's life, Sodom and Gomorrah are going to be destroyed a second time, but this time by God himself. So, and we start reading this in chapter 18 and verse 16. So it says, chapter 18, verse 16, then the men rose from there and looked towards Sodom, and Abraham went with them to send them on their way. And the Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham what I am doing? Since Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. For I have known him in order that he may command his children and his household after him, that they keep the way of the Lord, to do righteousness and justice. The Lord may bring to Abraham what he has spoken to him. So the Lord is going to reveal to Abraham a little bit about himself. This is as a result of this closer relationship that Abraham has been building up with the Lord, or that the Lord has been building up with Abraham. Now he's going to reveal a little bit more about himself to him. So in verse 20, the Lord said, because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very grave, I will go down now and see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry against it that has come up to me, and if not, I will know. Verse 22, then the men turned away from there and went towards Sodom, but Abraham still stood before the Lord. And Abraham came near and said, would you also destroy the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there were 50 righteous within the city. Would you destroy the place and not spare it for the sake of the 50 righteous that were in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing as this, to slay the righteous with the wicked, so that the righteous should be as the wicked. Far be it from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth do right? And the Lord reassures Abraham that he's not going to destroy the city first with 50 righteous, and then Abraham starts going down, and he finally ends with 10. Suppose there were 10 righteous. The Lord says, I would not destroy it for the sake of 10. So God is revealing something about himself, which is that he's a just God, right? We've seen this earlier in the book of Genesis. He says to Cain, the voice of your brother's blood is crying out to me from the ground. So now he says, I've heard the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah, and he's going to destroy it. But he's not going to destroy the righteous with the wicked. That's a question people always have when we're talking about God's judgment. Is he going to just lump everyone together? Well, no. He says, I'm not going to destroy the righteous with the wicked. So, but there is this judgment that's coming to Sodom and Gomorrah. Later on, judgment is going to come to the lands of Canaan and to all these nations that are around Abraham. But God had told him earlier in chapter 14, the reason why his descendants are going to be slaves in Egypt 400 years is because the iniquity of the Amorites had not yet reached, was not yet complete. So that there was still more sin that they were going to do before God was going to come in and judge them. So God is very intentional about his timing, and now he's turning to Sodom and Gomorrah. And this is the second time in the book of Genesis where we see God judging people for their sin. The first time was with the flood. I mean, aside from individuals. So the first time was the flood, and God destroyed the whole world with a flood, and only one person in his family escaped. So we're going to see this story has a lot of similarities with the flood story. So, but except, of course, the flood was the entire world, whereas this is just going to be these two cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. So there's a bit of foreshadowing here about things to come in the future when God will judge the entire world once again, just like he did with the flood the first time. So Sodom and Gomorrah are a bit of a foreshadowing of that, of God's ultimate justice against the world. But he says, I won't destroy it if there's 10 righteous within it. So the Lord goes his way after he finished speaking to Abraham. And then we get to chapter 19. And in chapter 19, Lot is going to meet with these two angels. Now, Lot is going to meet only with these two angels. Abraham met with the three the three people that he saw from a distance, and we find out that one of them is actually the Lord. Lot doesn't meet with the Lord directly. He only meets with these two angels. So he's already meeting with he's not meeting the Lord in the same way that Abraham did, although he does get to entertain these two angels. So chapter 19, verse 1, the two angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. So remember, Abraham was sitting in the door of his tent. That reflected his lifestyle. He was a pilgrim, and he's sitting in the door of his tent looking out. Lot is sitting in the gate of Sodom. So this is his home. This is his place. And it says Lot saw them. So just like Abraham, he's on the lookout for strangers. So that's a positive thing about Lot and a point of similarity. And he rose to meet them. Now, Abraham was said to run to meet them. So this is already not quite to the extent that Abraham went, but he rose to meet them. And just like Abraham, he bowed himself with his face toward the ground. In chapter 19, verse 2, he said, "Hear now, my lords, please turn into your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet that you may rise early and go on your way." And they said, "No, but we will spend the night in the open square." So they initially reject his offer, which was not the case for Abraham. So they initially reject his offer, but he insisted strongly in verse 3. And so we see his heart of hospitality here. That's a good thing for him, even though his relationship with the Lord is not quite as close as Abraham's was, or at least so it seems. So he insisted strongly. He is also very concerned about showing hospitality to strangers, and that, of course, is very important. And as a result, he is also going to get to be closer to the Lord through his willingness to serve in that way and show hospitality. So he insisted strongly in verse 3. They turned into him and entered his house. Then he made them a feast and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. Now, before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both old and young, all people from every quarter, surrounded the house. And they called to Lot and said to him, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us that we may know them carnally." So Lot went out to them through the doorway. The doorway is important in this story. So he goes out through the doorway, shut the door behind him. And he said, "Please, my brethren, do not do so wickedly." So that's good. He's calling out the sin in Sodom and urging them not to do so wickedly. But then in verse 8, we see how the thinking of Sodom and Gomorrah has infected his mind. So he proposes a solution in verse 8. He says, "See now, I have two daughters who have not known a man. Please let me bring them out to you, and you may do with them as you wish. Only do nothing to these men, since for this reason they have come under the shadow of my roof." So Lot has a compromise idea here. He's backed up against the corner. He doesn't have many options. And so this is the solution that he comes up with. He's going to offer his two daughters in order to try to protect these two strangers. So you see how his living in this city, this sinful city, has really limited, really, I guess, corrupted his way of thinking about the world. Notice he doesn't, at least it's not reported that he asks the Lord for help, but the Lord does help him. And so the Lord doesn't have him go through with his plan. Verse 9, they said, "Stand back." And they said, "This man, this one came in to stay here, and he keeps acting as a judge. Now we will deal worse with you than with them." So they pressed hard against the man Lot and came near to break down the door. But the men reached out their hands and pulled Lot into the house with them and shut the door. Now, this is another point of similarity with the story of Noah. You remember God shuts the door of the ark. Here, these men shut the door of the house, and everyone outside of that house is going to get caught up in the judgment, the destruction of the city. So they struck the men, verse 11, who were at the doorway of the house with blindness, both small and great, so that they became weary trying to find the door. Then the men said to Lot, have you anyone else here, son-in-law, your sons, your daughters, and whomever you have in the city? Take them out of this place, for we will destroy this place, because the outcry against them has grown great before the face of the Lord. And the Lord sent us to destroy it. So Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law who had married his daughters and said, get up, get out of this place, for the Lord will destroy the city. And you see Lot acting as warning his relatives. He's warning them of the coming judgment. So he's doing something that's very good here in this very evil city. But to his sons-in-law, he seemed to be joking. And this is another instance of that word joking coming up here. That's the name for Isaac. Earlier, Abraham and Sarah were laughing at God's promise. Here is much more serious. You see the sons-in-law laughing at the idea that God is going to come and judge them. So in verse 15, when the morning dawned, the angels urged Lot to hurry. So Lot is dragging his feet here. This is another point of similarity with the story of Noah, potentially. Noah doesn't enter the ark on the same day that the Lord tells him to enter the ark. Now, maybe he had some reasons behind that, but he doesn't enter the ark until the day when it rains, whereas God told him 7 days beforehand to enter the ark. So whether or not Noah did anything wrong in that, clearly Lot is doing something wrong here. He's delaying leaving the city. So the angels urged Lot to hurry, saying, arise, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, lest you be consumed in the punishment of the city. And while he lingered, the men took hold of his hand and his wife's hand and the hands of his 2 daughters, the Lord being merciful to him, and they brought him out and set him outside the city. So they had to literally drag him out of the city here. You see the hold that this city has on him. And it's very easy when we're living in the world and when we're spending a lot of our time, investing a lot of ourselves into the world, it can be very hard to let go. And we see Lot really struggling with this. But the Lord is merciful to him. Now, Lot isn't exactly the greatest person. We saw him offering up his daughters earlier. His daughters are not great. They're going to end up abusing their father later on in this story. And we don't know much about Lot's wife because she's about to exit the story. So these were not necessarily people who deserve to be saved from the judgment, but God brought them out anyway. He was merciful to them. There weren't even 10 righteous people in the city. There wasn't even one righteous person in the city. None of us are righteous, but the Lord still had mercy. So that's a great thing for us as we look forward to that future judgment of the world. The Lord still had mercy on Lot. So it came to pass in verse 17, when he had brought them outside, that he said, escape for your life. Do not look behind you, nor stay anywhere in the plain. Escape to the mountains, lest you be destroyed. Right, and these instructions to Lot and his family, this should be a warning to us as well. Don't look behind you. Don't linger. Escape for your life. So we're not supposed to be caught up in the world. We're not supposed to look behind us and get caught up in the things of the world to try to have our foot in both worlds. We're called to leave the world. And we're reminded later on in the New Testament, remember Lot's wife, the consequences of being too caught up with the world. So verse 18, Lot says to them, please know my lords. Now, when Abraham pleaded with the Lord, he was bargaining with the Lord to save the city of Sodom if there were some righteous people in it. Now, Lot is going to do something similar, except his bargaining is a lot more kind of self-centered, focused on himself. So he says, please know my lords, indeed, your servant has found favor in your sight, and you have increased your mercy, which you have shown me by saving my life. But I cannot escape to the mountains, lest some evil overtake me and I die. So he's afraid. Of course, it doesn't make sense. Why would the Lord send him, rescue him out of the city of Sodom just to have him die in the mountains? But this is his fear. So he says in verse 20, see now, this city is near. So he's going to bargain for this city. So he says, this city is near enough to flee to, and it is a little one. Please let me escape there. Is it not a little one? And my soul shall live. So he said to him, see, I have favored you concerning this thing also, and that I will not overthrow the city of which you have spoken. So Lot also rescues the city from destruction. He says, hurry, escape there, for I cannot do anything until you arrive there. Therefore, the name of that city is called Zoar. The sun had risen upon the earth when Lot entered Zoar. Then the Lord rained. And of course, if he rains water, this would be a problem because the Lord had promised not to destroy the earth again with water. So this time it says the Lord rained brimstone and fire on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. So he overthrew those cities, all the plain, all the inhabitants of those cities, or whatever grew on the ground. So those cities that had seemed so impressive to Lot, and seems like they gave him a permanent home, unlike Abraham, who was the wanderer, the pilgrim. Those cities are destroyed. And in verse 26, his wife looked back behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. And Abraham went early in the morning to the place where he had stood before the Lord, and he looked towards Sodom and Gomorrah. And the sight that meets him is a lot different than the sight that met Lot's eyes many years ago when he chose to go and live there. As he looked towards Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the lands of the plain, and he saw and behold the smoke of the land, which went up like the smoke of a furnace. And it came to pass when God destroyed the cities of the plain that God remembered Abraham. You remember that famous verse, God remembered Noah. Here we read God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow when he overthrew the cities in which Lot dwelt. Now, because God remembered Noah, the humanity was saved from the destruction of the flood. There was this one man and his family whom God rescued out. Now we see something a little bit different here. It says God remembered Abraham and saved Lot. So Lot was rescued, but his deliverance is right now connected to Abraham's relationship with the Lord. And of course, we now know the full story, which is that God is planning to rescue the whole world through Abraham, through one of his children, one of his descendants, who would one day come and provide that sacrifice that rescues us from this coming judgment, right? The whole world is going to be destroyed by fire, but some of us are going to be rescued from that because God remembered Abraham, and more specifically for us, God remembers the Lord Jesus and what he's done for us. So Abraham is kind of prefiguring that right here. He's acting in the role that ultimately would be fulfilled by Jesus in interceding for Sodom and interceding for Lot. So Lot is rescued. God remembered him. And in verse 30, we read, Lot went up out of Zoar and dwelt in the mountains. Now remember, God had originally told him to go to the mountains, but he had been afraid. He didn't want to go to the mountains, so he went to Zoar instead. He interceded on behalf of Zoar so that it would be saved. Now, it says he leaves Zoar and goes to the mountains, and his two daughters were with him, for he was afraid to dwell in Zoar. So Lot's just afraid of everything now. His whole life has been overturned. So he first went to Zoar because he was afraid to go to the mountains. Now he's going to the mountains because he's afraid to live in Zoar. And he and his two daughters lived in a cave. And remember, he was afraid that something bad would happen to him in the mountains, and that actually is going to happen. But it's the evil kind of comes from within his own family. So verse 31, the firstborn said to the younger, our father is old, and there is no man on the earth to come into us, as is the custom of all the earth. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him, that we may preserve the lineage of our father. And that's what they do. So this is once again another point of similarity with the story of Noah, because you remember Noah got drunk, and his son Ham came in and saw him, and there was that whole story. So something similar happens here with Lot, and we see again that thinking of the Sodom and Gomorrah that has come in and corrupted the minds of Lot, and of his daughters and of his family. So there's really serious consequences for the way that they've been living in the world and neglecting their relationship with the Lord. So they end up having children. Once again, they're not trusting in the Lord to provide for them, to protect them, to provide them with children. They're taking things into their own hands, doing things their own way. It's kind of a more extreme version of what Abraham had been doing earlier in chapter 16. So it's a very sad story, but Sodom and Gomorrah are destroyed. You see the consequences of becoming entangled with the world. And once again, though, Lot is rescued. Once again, Abraham intervenes on behalf of Sodom and Gomorrah, although this time he only saves Lot. So just to recap that big picture once again, we had the story of Abraham and Hagar having Ishmael. That was a low point in Abraham's life. On either side of that, there was a high point where Abraham meets with God, and God reaffirms his promises to Abraham and gives him the sign. First, in chapter 15, there was that sign of with the animals being ripped apart. Chapter 18, there was the sign of circumcision. Then on either side, sorry, that was chapter 17. On either side of that, then, there is the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. So we see the place in the world that seems like it was a nice place to live, that is destroyed. And so we see that Abraham is really the smart one here, because even though he's a wanderer, a stranger, he doesn't have a permanent home, he made the wise choice not to throw in his lot with the world. He made the choice to trust in the Lord. So that's also kind of a high point of his life. Now, if you remember before the first time that Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed, the story that we had was Abraham going down to Egypt. This was all the way back in chapter 12. He went down to Egypt and he lied about his wife. Well, now in chapter 20, we'll get the same story again. So we see, again, one of these low points in Abraham's life. So he has these moments of faith. He also has these moments of doubt and fear, especially. We see fear as a theme throughout the book of Genesis. Are you going to trust in the Lord, or are you going to be afraid and take things into your own hands? So in chapter 20, verse 1, it says, Abraham journeyed from there to the south and dwelt between Kadesh and Shur and stayed in Gerar. So he's gone down south again, and at least historically in Abraham's life, when he goes down south, usually things go south in a metaphorical sense as well. So he goes down, he stays in Gerar, and in verse 2, Abraham said of Sarah, his wife, she is my sister. And Abimelech, the king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah. But God came to Abimelech in a dream by night and said to him, indeed, you are a dead man, because you have taken a woman, because of the woman you have taken, for she is a man's wife. But Abimelech had not come near her, and he said, Lord, will you slay a righteous nation also? And that seems to echo Abraham's words earlier. You remember when he was interceding for Sodom and Gomorrah, will you slay the righteous with the wicked? So Abimelech asked the Lord, will you slay a righteous nation also? Did he not say to me in verse 5, she is my sister? And even she herself said, he is my brother. In the integrity of my heart and innocence of my hands, I have done this. And God said to him, yes, I know that you did this in the integrity of your heart, for I also withheld you from sinning against me. Therefore, I did not let you touch her. Now, therefore, restore the man's wife, for he's a prophet, and he will pray for you, and you shall live. So God tells Abimelech, go ask Abraham to intercede for you. So just like we saw him earlier interceding, Abraham is going to intercede again, even though we see from this story that Abraham is hardly the perfect intercessor. Right? It's his fault that this whole situation has happened in the first place. But nevertheless, God tells him, ask Abraham to pray for you, and you will live. But if you do not restore her, verse 7, know that you shall surely die, you and all who are yours. So verse 8 of chapter 20, Abimelech rose early in the morning. He didn't wait around, called all his servants and told all these things in their hearing, and the men were very much afraid. And Abimelech called Abraham and said to him, what have you done to us? Pharaoh asks a similar question, and it actually echoes, this question comes up a lot in the book of Genesis. What is this you have done? What have you done to us? We saw this earlier with the Lord asking Eve, what is this you have done? Later on, he asks Cain, what have you done? So here Abraham is confronted with his sin. What have you done to us? How have I offended you? How have I, and that you have brought on me and on my kingdom a great sin? You have done deeds to me that ought not to be done. So here it's very explicit. What Abraham was doing was wrong. I mean, maybe the last time it didn't spell it out for us clearly. Here it is spelled out. And verse 10, Abimelech said to Abraham, what did you have in view that you have done this thing? So right, he's asking Abraham this, and it seems like Abraham has nothing to respond. He just repeats the question again in verse 10. And in verse 11, Abraham said, because I thought, surely the fear of God is not in this place, and they will kill me on account of my wife. So he was afraid. And then in verse 12, he offers some justification of himself. He says, indeed, she is truly my sister. She is the daughter of my father, but not the daughter of my mother. And she became my wife. So this is new information. This wasn't told us the first time Abraham had lied about his wife. It is a bit disturbing. Even in the Jewish law, this kind of a marriage would not be allowed, marrying your half sister. So that was weird even back then. But that's what Abraham had done. Verse 13, it came to pass when God caused me to wander from my father's house, that I said to her, this is your kindness that you should do for me. In every place where we go, say of me, he is my brother. So now we find out that this wasn't just a one-off thing, or this wasn't just twice that Abraham did it. This was his habit. This was what he would always do as they would wander around and come to a new place. So this is something that he did frequently that he should not have been doing. But Abimelech restores Abram's wife. He says in verse 15, see, the land is before you, dwell where it pleases you. Verse 16, he says to Sarah, behold, I have given your brother, and he's a bit sarcastic there, behold, I have given your brother 1,000 pieces of silver. Indeed, this vindicates you before all who are with you, and before everybody. Thus she was rebuked. So Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech and his wife and his female servants, and then they bore children. For the Lord had closed up all the wombs of the house of Abimelech because of Sarah, Abraham's wife. So that tells you that this has been going on for a long time, right? They're able to notice that no one's having children. So this was something that was long-term, something that Abraham should not have been doing, that revealed a lack of trust in the Lord, and that it took a long time. And Abraham didn't even set things right himself, right? God intervened in this situation. All right. Abraham could have gone to Abimelech and told him the truth at any point, but God is the one who ended up revealing it to him. But we also see something else in this passage, which is that God has the power over childbirth, right? So he closed up the wombs of everyone in Abimelech's kingdom. Now he is about to demonstrate that he also has the reverse power. So I don't know if this was on Abraham or Sarah's mind as they were seeing that what God had done to Abimelech and how he had demonstrated his power over the ability to have children as they're waiting for their own child. But sure enough, God comes through for Abraham and Sarah. So in chapter 21, verse 1, it says, the Lord visited Sarah as he had said. The Lord did for Sarah as he had spoken, right? That's repeated for us twice. The Lord did what he said. Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age at the set time which God had spoken to him. So and they might not have known, what that set time was. Maybe God had actually set a date, or maybe it was just referring to the fact that God had said there is a set time and it's going to happen. I've already decided on the time, and they just had to wait for the Lord. So verse 3, Abraham called the name of the son who was born to him, whom Sarah bore to him, Isaac. Then Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Now Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him, and Sarah said, God has made me laugh. So now Sarah is laughing again, this time not in derision at laughing at God's promise, but laughing because God had fulfilled his promise, even when it seemed ridiculous. So she says, God has made me laugh, and all who hear will laugh with me. Right? So we should listen to this story, and it should remind us that God comes through even when it seems ridiculous. So we should be laughing with Sarah, knowing that God comes through for us. So she also said, "Who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children, for I have borne him a son in his old age?" So God came through in his promise, but there is still a problem. And that problem is there's still tension in the family between Hagar and Sarah. So verse 9 of chapter 21 says, Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, whom she had born to Abraham, scoffing. And actually, it just says laughing. So it's not clear if he was making fun of Isaac or if he was just playing around. Regardless, she saw him laughing, and she said to Abraham, "Cast out this bondwoman and her son, for the son of this bondwoman shall not be heir with my son, namely with Isaac." Now, Ishmael is actually not named again in this passage. He's about to be exiting the story. So Sarah calls him the son of this bond woman. And she says he needs to go. And verse 11, the matter was very displeasing in Abraham's sight because of his son. But God said to Abraham, "Do not let it displeasing in your sight because of the lad or because of your bondwoman. Whatever Sarah has said to you, listen to her voice." So remember, this was something that we heard the last time around. We said Abraham listened to Sarah's voice. This time God is telling him, listen to Sarah's voice. And he says, "For in Isaac your seed shall be called." So this time Abraham is actually supposed to listen to Sarah. And this issue, this problem in their family needs to be resolved. And the only way to resolve it is going to be to separate Ishmael and Hagar from Sarah and Isaac. But God promises him, or reminds him of the promise in verse 13, "Yet I will also make a nation of the son of the bondwoman, because she is your seed." So Abraham, verse 14, rose early, and he's going to now have to take care of a problem that was caused because of his own and because of Sarah's sin, right? So this is his own fault. He's caused this terrible situation, and now it needs to be resolved in a way that's going to cause a lot of pain to Hagar and Ishmael. So he rose early in the morning. He took bread and a skin of water, putting it on her shoulder. He gave it to the boy and the boy to Hagar and sent her away. And she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. So he sent her away to certain death. But the Lord has promised to be with her and with the child. So Abraham sends her away in faith, knowing that God is going to take care of them. But still, this would be normally be certain death. So in verse 15, the water in the skin was used up. Right, you can't survive very long in the desert without a reliable source of water. So the water in the skin was used up, and she placed the boy under one of the shrubs. He was under a shrub, and she went, actually, as it says in Hebrews, she threw him under one of the shrubs. And she went and sat down across from him at a distance of about a bow shot, where she said to herself, "Let me not see the death of the boy." So she thinks he's going to die. So she sat opposite him and lifted her voice and wept. Once again, God heard the voice of the lad. So God is the God who hears, and he heard the voice of the lad. And the angel of God called to Hagar out of heaven and said to her, "What ails you, Hagar?" Once again, he meets her with a question. "Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the lad where he is." Remember, Ishmael's name means God will hear. "Arise, lift up the lad, and hold him with your hand, for I will make him a great nation." Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. So all of a sudden, Hagar sees something that she hadn't seen before. It's the thing that's going to save her son. So she sees the well of water. She sees the thing that's going to save her son. She goes over and gives him a drink. And it says that God was with the lad. Verse 20, he grew, dwelt in the wilderness, became an archer. So that is a story of how Ishmael was sent away and certain death, but God promised to be with him. Abraham had to rise up early, send him off, but God came through on his promises anyway. Now I'm going to skip over the rest of chapter 21 so we can get to chapter 22 to finish off. End of chapter 21, Abimelech makes a covenant with Abraham, recognizing that Abraham is actually a big deal. Even though he doesn't seem like much, Abimelech is eager to make a covenant with Abraham and his descendants after him. So that this is maybe not something he would have done before when Abraham didn't even have a son, but Abraham has a son, and Abimelech comes and he wants to make an agreement with him. So then we get to chapter 22. And in chapter 22, we're going to get a story that is going to recall for us the very earliest days of Abraham's faith journey. So it says, chapter 22 and verse 1, it came to pass after these things that God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, and he said, here I am. Then he said, take now your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the lands of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. So once again, Abraham is called to go to a place that he does not know. Remember the first time God called him, he said, go to a place about which that I will show you. Now he says, go to the place I will tell you. So Abraham has to step out in faith. And once again, he's being called on to give up his family, this time his son. God calls Isaac Abraham's only son, once again reflecting God's view that this is the legitimate son of Abraham, Isaac. And Abraham's called to go out in faith. Now, the place that Abraham first gets to when he comes into the land of Canaan is the terebinth tree of Moreh. Moreh is a word that means teacher, but more literally, it means to cause someone to see something, right? So to cause something to be seen. Now he's being called to the land of Moriah. That's the word Moreh, but with God's name added on the end. So that's God causes to be seen, right? This has been a big theme throughout the book of Genesis, that on the one hand, you have the things that you can see right here and now. And on the other hand, you have faith in the God who can make invisible things be seen. So God can cause something to be seen, or right, in other words, he could provide. That's another translation that you could give to this. He can cause something to be seen. He can provide something even when initially you can't see it, even when things are not clear at all. So God calls Abraham out. Once again, he's going to go to this place where God will cause him to see something that he couldn't have anticipated. So Abraham in verse 3 rose early in the morning. So just like with Ishmael, he has to get up early in obedience to the Lord and send his son out to what would normally be certain death. So he saddled his donkey, and the two young men took two of his young men with him. This is verse 3 of chapter 22. And Isaac his son, and he split the wood for the burnt offering, and he arose and went to the place of which God had told him. Then on the third day, Abraham lifted his eyes and saw the place afar off. And Abraham said to his young men, stand here with the donkey. The lad and I will go yonder and worship, and we will come back to you. Now in Hebrews, we read that Abraham must have concluded that God would raise Isaac from the dead. Because, and this is referenced in Hebrews as well, God had said, in Isaac your seed will be called. Right? So all of God's promises to Abraham are riding on Isaac. If Isaac dies and stays dead, there's no way God's promises could be fulfilled. Now, earlier, Abraham had a lot of trouble trusting the Lord with his children, with his descendants. Right? He even laughed at God's promise that God could provide for him. But God promised, in Isaac your seed will be called. And now Abraham is finally ready to trust God, even with his descendants. So he's been ready to trust God with other things. He's gone to battle, trusting in the Lord. He's gone up against kings, but now he can trust God even with his son. So he goes up, he says, the lad and I will worship, and we will come back to you. So he goes up. Isaac asks in verse 7, Where is the lamb for the burnt offering? Abraham says in verse 8, prophetically, my son, God will provide for himself a lamb for a burnt offering. And in verse 10, as he stretches out his hands to take the knife to kill his son, there's a lot of little subtle details that are given to us in this passage about him splitting the wood, picking up the knife, really making us think through this story and what it would have been like for Abraham to perform each of these actions. But he has the knife in his hand. He's about to kill his son. But in verse 11, the angel of the Lord called to him out of heaven. You remember the angel of the Lord also had called to Hagar. So there's parallels between these two stories. He says to him, Abraham, Abraham. So he said, here I am. And he said in verse 12, do not lay your hands on the lad or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. So then, just like Hagar, Abram lifts up his eyes and he sees something that's going to rescue his son. He lifts up his eyes and looked, and behold, and there behind him was a ram caught in a thicket by its horns. So Abraham offers that instead of his son, Isaac. And he calls the name of the place in verse 14, the Lord will provide, or the Lord will cause it to be seen. As it is said to this day, in the mount of the Lord, it will be provided, or it will be made visible. It will be made something that you can see. So Abraham, in this experience, has his faith tested like never before. And this time, instead of doing like he's done before and giving into fear and not trusting the Lord with his children, he trusts the Lord. It's a difficult experience for him. In many ways, reflects his experience earlier with sending away Ishmael. That was something that was his own fault, something bad that had happened. Now Abraham has to go through that experience again with his son Isaac. But the Lord has promised in both cases that he was going to that he was going to make a great nation out of both of these children, and the Lord comes through and protects both of these children. The Lord does not take child sacrifices, even though many of the nations around Israel offered up child sacrifices. Here, Abraham almost offers Isaac, but God says, wait, and he provides a ram in its place. And we know, of course, again, the big picture that God was actually going to send his son, and his son was going to take the place of all of us dying in our place. And so we see that for the first time here. Abraham has the opportunity to become very close to God because he, just like God, he knows what it was like to go through that process of preparing to offer up his only son. Of course, God went through that process as well, and he actually did offer up his only son for all of us in our place to redeem all of us. So that really is the high point of the story of Abraham. So it started in faith and it ends in faith. We see that Abraham has grown throughout his journey. He had his ups and downs, but as a result of this experience, his faith is really made real, right? Maybe he himself wouldn't have known what choice he would have made, what decision he would have made, until he actually had to go through with it himself. So this really makes his faith real. We read later in the book of Hebrews that the Lord Jesus himself learned obedience through the things that he suffered. So going through this experience of suffering helps us to it changes our relationship with the Lord. It changed Abraham's relationship with the Lord as he went through that testing. The Lord drew him closer to himself. So we'll close there. We're over time. Lord, I thank you that you were willing to give your only son for us. I thank you that we can trust you completely and fully with everything in our lives. So please help us to trust you more. I ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.